Are you any good at setting boundaries? Or do you let people walk all over you, take advantage of your good nature? Today we're going to talk about something that's important to everybody, and that's setting boundaries. Now, this can be difficult enough in your native language, and in a foreign language it can be even more tricky. But don't worry, in this video I'm going to share some really useful phrases for communicating your boundaries in English. And I've also got 8 tips to help you get your message across effectively in both your professional and your personal life. As usual, there is a full transcript available to download on my website, along with some video notes where I cover some of the vocabulary that I've gone over in today's video. But first off, what is a boundary? Well, a boundary is a limit that defines what you're comfortable with and how you want to be treated in your interactions with other people. Boundaries are crucial because they protect our time, energy, and our well-being. And without boundaries, we can easily feel overwhelmed or taken advantage of. Setting boundaries is about recognizing our limits and being able to communicate them clearly. It's not about being difficult or rude. Rather, it's about self-respect and creating healthy, balanced interactions. And it's a really good way to look after yourself and to show other people how you want to be treated, ultimately leading to stronger, more positive relationships. When setting a boundary, especially in British English, where we tend to be slightly indirect and overly polite, you don't have to explicitly state that you're setting a boundary. You don't have to announce the boundary. We can use the language to be a little bit more subtle and less harsh. This way you can avoid ruffling any feathers, which basically means pissing people off. One of my favourite phrases for this is, I'd really appreciate it if. Imagine a scenario where a colleague is perhaps messaging you late into the evening on a regular basis and you're not comfortable with this. You don't want this to happen anymore. You could say, I'd really appreciate it if you avoided messaging me in the evening. I like to switch off after 7 o'clock. It's soft and respectful, but it still gets your message across. Another one I really love is, it would be really helpful if. Okay, so I've got a real life example here. As some of you know, my son has now gone off to university. He's left home. And I don't know when to expect him back. So I said to him, it'd be really helpful if you let me know in advance when you're planning to come home for the weekend, because that way I can plan ahead and prepare an amazing feast for you. Of course, if my son were to suddenly turn up on the doorstep completely out of the blue, I'd be delighted, and I certainly wouldn't turn him away. But by saying to him, it would be helpful if you let me know in advance when you're coming home, it allows me to plan my time. And also, indirectly, it asks him to respect my time. In a professional setting, you could say, it would be helpful if we could agree on deadlines in advance so I don't feel quite so rushed. In this situation, you're being proactive about setting boundaries, which helps to maintain healthy relationships at work. Another good one is, I hope you understand that. So, in a professional setting, I hope you understand that I need to prioritise the projects that I'm currently working on before I can take on any more work. Or in a social situation with a friend, you could say, I hope you understand that I'm really not being rude. Work is completely overwhelming at the moment and I need to take this weekend to just get a bit of rest and switch off. You might also hear somebody say, I'm afraid that, and this is a polite and indirect way to set a boundary, even though it's not about fear. I'm afraid I won't be able to come for a drink after work tonight because I want to get home and see my kids. Of course, there are going to be some times when people don't pick up on your subtle, indirect request. And in this case, it's necessary to be a little bit more direct while still being respectful. So, for example, you could say, oh, I don't know if I made myself clear earlier, but I really need to go straight home after work tonight, so I'm not going to be joining you for drinks. This is a good way to reinforce your boundary without being confrontational. Sometimes all it needs is for you to be a little bit more direct. And then, of course, there are those people who are not going to get the message. And also those people who push their luck a little bit. Pushing your luck means testing your boundaries, pushing you to your limits in the hope that you'll change your mind or you'll eventually say yes. In these situations, saying no clearly is really crucial. It's not about being rude. You could say something like, I'm really sorry, but I can't help with that. No, I'm afraid I can't do that today. Sorry. This helps to reinforce boundaries and ensures that people respect them. You can still be kind in this kind of communication, but you're just letting people know that pushing their luck isn't going to get them what they want. So that gives you a little bit of insight into the nuances of the language when it comes to setting boundaries politely in British English. Now I'm going to give you 8 tips which will help you set your boundaries, not just politely, but also assertively, confidently, and respectfully. The first tip is to use I statements when communicating your boundaries in English, instead of focusing on what the other person is doing. Concentrating on your own experience and your own needs is less confrontational. For example, at work, you could say, I feel a bit overwhelmed when I have so many tasks assigned to me all at once. Would it be possible if we could have a discussion about how I should prioritise them? This subtle shift in language makes the conversation sound a little bit more collaborative and less combative. Tip number 2 is to be direct but kind. There's absolutely no need to be rude in these sorts of conversations. For example, you could say, I really appreciate your concern, but I'd rather do this work on my own. In this case, you're setting a boundary while keeping a polite tone. Tip 3 is to express your needs clearly. Sometimes you can fall into the trap of being a little bit vague when setting a boundary. This can cause misunderstandings and confusion, so it's much better to be clear to avoid misunderstanding and so the other person knows exactly what to expect. So in a work setting, you could say to a colleague, I've got a lot to do this afternoon, so I'm going to shut myself away and concentrate on finishing this project. I won't be available for calls. Tip 4 is to set limits on your availability. So you're making it clear to the other person that yes, you're willing to do something, but you are willing to do it at a particular time. You're not available constantly. I'm happy to help, but I can only really do it on Thursdays and Fridays because I have other commitments the rest of the week. This allows you to offer help and support, but on your terms. Tip number 5 is about using positive language. So when setting boundaries, you can soften the message by framing it positively. For example, you could say, it's been lovely to talk to you, but I really need to get back to work now. Tip number 6 is to acknowledge their feelings. Acknowledging somebody else's feelings can make your boundaries seem more acceptable to them. Obviously, empathy is a key part to communication and human interaction. I understand that you want to talk, but I need a little bit of time to process my thoughts. Perhaps I could get back to you later. Which takes us on to number 7, which is to offer alternatives. When you can't meet somebody's request, offering an alternative can go a long way. I can't meet for lunch this week, but how about a coffee sometime next week? By doing this, you maintain the connection, but at the same time, you protect your time. Tip number 8 is arguably the most important. Be consistent. When you stick to your limits, other people are more likely to respect them. Being consistent helps to avoid confusion, and it also reinforces your message. I hope you found today's video useful, but before we wrap up, I've got a quick book recommendation. The Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. Now, this book offers practical advice for setting boundaries, both in your professional and your personal life. One thing I particularly liked about this book was that it includes scripts for different scenarios. So you can practice enforcing your boundaries, practice what you're going to say. If this sounds like the kind of thing you're interested in, I'll put a link in the description below and you can go and have a look. Now, before I go, remember that setting boundaries isn't about being selfish, but it is about self-care. And you might have seen my last video, which I made, which was about idioms for talking about self-care. If you missed it, go and check it out now. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, then make sure you give me a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can see my future videos. Really look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.